Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the Amazing Race 34 Power Rankings following episode 4, the end of the Mega Leg. And this was an interesting one for sure, as we saw pretty big shifts here again, and we got a boot by the end of it, so at least there's that. And I feel like we are starting to get a better sense of where these teams are, which again will be a net positive for the rating here. But there are 10 teams to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 10, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Rich and Dom. And this was to be expected. I mean, they were pretty consistently in the back of the pack, and even on this section of the leg, Glenda and Lumumba did manage to pass them, and we even saw Dom have a bit of a breakdown once all the other teams had left the roadblock, to where she really wanted to take the 4-hour penalty, even though it would just put them out of the race. But then Rich is just able to convince her to complete the roadblock, and from that point on, it was pretty clear that they were going to be eliminated. But even if they had survived this leg, again, I feel like they really showed that they were not cut out for the race, and they were just outclassed at multiple points throughout the race, and because of that, they are here at number 10. And with that, there are 9 teams left in the race to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they are to win the race from this point. But at number 9, the team that I believe is the least likely to win the race from this point is Aubrey and David. And it's not as if they had a bad leg here. I mean, even ignoring the fact that they did really well at the end of the first roadblock, which I largely attribute to their unique skill set, I felt like they did pretty alright throughout the rest of the leg, to where they were ultimately able to squeak on by with a 6th place finish, although that wasn't before they kind of fell behind during the end of the second roadblock and leading into the second detour, where they definitely struggled to a degree that allowed them to fall from 3rd place to 6th place. So it's not as if they performed that poorly on the Mega Leg, and I could definitely see them going up in future ratings, but I feel like at this point they just haven't really impressed me all that much with their overall performance, and I still feel like they needed to prove themselves more in order for me to have them higher here. And with them not being a major focus in the edit, I can't really have them higher than number 9. Now I'm moving on to number 8, and we have a bit of a similar team, although they definitely have a better track record in the earlier stages of the race. But here we have Glenda and Lumumba, and I kind of debated with these two, as obviously I can't ignore their overall results from the first 2 legs. It's just that they performed really poorly on this Mega Leg. And yes, while they did make a bit of a comeback going from last place all the way up to 8th place, I still feel like I'm not that confident in their overall race ability. And I feel like as time goes on, other teams will simply outclass them. So while I feel like they'll definitely be in it for a little bit, I feel like their overall race ability is not super impressive to me. And because of that, they're here at number 8. Now I'm moving on to number 7, and we have another interesting team to get into here, and definitely one that's dropped quite a bit from the last rating here. But here we have Linton and Sharik, and we obviously had to go to the big moment in the episode where Sharik wanted to quit the race. She obviously struggled quite a bit during that second roadblock with them like chiseling out the statue, and she considered quitting the race. Even after she completed the roadblock and they weren't in last place, she just felt so stupid and so bad about it that she wanted to just drop out right then and there. And a lot of the episode was about Linton trying to get her to continue forward, even up until they got to the pit stop where they had to talk to Phil. Like, Phil literally asked her if she wanted to quit the race, and it was only then that she decided against it. So while that is good in that they're going to stay in the race, I still don't feel that great about their overall race ability. Now granted, I feel like they'll definitely be in it for quite a bit given how much focus they've got in the edit up to this point, but this was just a pretty negative look for them in this episode, to where I'm not entirely sure they're going to win at this point. So because of that, I do have them here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have a team that definitely has not had the best track record as of late, but I just have more confidence in them to get out of tough situations. But here we have Quinton and Maddie, and they obviously didn't do that well in the first part of the Mega Leg, dropping all the way to 8th place by the end of that first roadblock. But this was definitely a better episode for them. They were able to make quite a bit of a bounce back during the second part of it, where they were able to race to the second roadblock. And while they did okay at that, they were definitely able to, again, make a bit of a comeback with the second detour to ultimately come in 5th place. Now, granted, I think some of that is due to other teams like falling behind, but I think it goes to show that Quinton and Maddie are capable of recovering from bad situations. And through that, I feel like they definitely have some potential moving forward. But with that said, I feel like their track record does not justify me putting them too much higher than number 6 here. Now we're moving on to number 5, and this is definitely a team that I've defended before, and to be fair, I still feel like they have potential moving forward, but I feel like ever since the first leg, we've really seen a lot of their flaws. But here we have Derek and Claire, and I view Derek and Claire kind of similar to Quinton and Maddie, where despite them not having the best showing after the first leg, I still feel like they have potential to bounce back from tough situations. And it's kind of similar to Quinton and Maddie, I felt like this was definitely a better second half of the mega leg than the first half, where they were obviously able to go from 8th place by the start of the second roadblock to, again, like jumping up a spot, and they were able to hold that for the rest of the leg. So not too impressive, and they obviously get the 7th place finish here. And obviously, I feel like other teams have had better track records so far, but I still feel like, similar to Quinton and Maddie, that they're still a really well-rounded team that could bounce back from difficult situations. And through that, I'd be shocked if they went out through to their big collapse. But with that said, I mean, they are still capable of slipping up here and there to where I can't have them higher than number 5 at this point. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have two teams that are largely similar in my view, in that despite them not having the hottest starts, I feel like they have been finding their footing as the race has gone on. But at number 4, I did go with the team that has the slightly less impressive track record, but here we have Luis and Michelle. And again, I feel like ever since like the first 2 legs, I feel like they've done pretty well. They obviously had a very strong mega leg, where obviously they ended up coming out in 4th by the end of the first half. And yeah, while they did underperform to a degree in the second half, like particularly with that second roadblock, they were able to still come away with a 4th place finish, which, considering how mediocrely they started off on the race, I do have to give them some respect in that regard. Now, granted, it's not great that their second half was worse than their first half, but I still feel like they've proven themselves to be a pretty solid team, and definitely a team that, as they become more comfortable in the race, will continue to do better over time. But with that said, I feel like another team has definitely found their footing more, and plus has shown more potential to bounce back from tough situations, which is why I do have them here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have a team that's very similar to Luis and Michelle, but here we have Abby and Will, and really a lot of it came down to their performance on this past leg, where despite them like being in a rockier spot in the first half of the mega leg, they were able to make quite the comeback in the second half, where they did pretty well in the second roadblock, which, again, considering how much the other teams struggle with that, that's still pretty impressive. And they were able to really use their navigation to leapfrog certain teams. They were obviously able to get to the second detour all right, and by the end, they got a 3rd place finish, 1 spot above Luis and Michelle. So I feel like that alone is pretty noteworthy on its own. But obviously the fact that they were able to, again, use their navigation to really jump past a lot of these teams, including Luis and Michelle, that were doing well in the first half of the mega leg, really shows that Abby and Will have a lot of potential moving forward. Now, if I'm being honest, I feel like Abby and Will and Luis and Michelle are still largely similar in terms of their overall ability right now, but I still feel like these are two teams that are on the upswing. These are teams that will definitely be major forces on the race moving forward. And with Abby and Will having the better performance in this leg, I did decide to give them the edge for this week, and because of that, they are here at number 3. Now I'm moving on to number 2, and I feel like if we're going strictly off race ability, I'm not entirely confident in this team, which is funny considering they won the leg here, but here we have Emily and Molly, and I actually did consider putting them higher than where I put them last week, simply due to their edit. I feel like the edit has really gone out of its way to prop them up, really focusing on their storyline as being these long lost twins who are really using the race to make up for lost time. And I considered putting them higher, although at the time I felt like their race ability didn't really justify it, where despite them doing really well at the end of that second roadblock, I felt like before then they were just kind of in the middle of the pack, not doing super well. But then they really come out hot in the second half, where they're able to bypass Marcus and Michael during the second roadblock. And yeah, while they were trading places with them, by the end of it, they were able to pass Marcus and Michael and win the leg, which I feel like is really impressive on its own. Now, granted, I was able to tell from very early in the episode that they were probably going to win the leg, given their talk about how Marcus and Michael were the big threats. I had a good sense from that point on that they were probably going to win the leg. But even so, I feel like the fact that the edit has gone this far out of their way to prop up Emily and Molly is enough to have them at least as high on the list, as I feel like they're really going to be major characters in the story moving forward. Now again, if we're going strictly off their race ability, I feel like this, yes, they did win this leg here, and I feel like similar to these other teams that we talked about, they are a team that will probably be more consistent over time, but I still feel like Abby and Will and Luis and Michelle are probably teams that are probably better built than them, and through that, I could definitely see a world where they eventually pass them in terms of their race ability. But even so, I still feel like Emmy and Molly are going to be major contenders and pretty likely winners, which is why I did decide to have them here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the team that I believe is the most likely to win the race right now is still Marcus and Michael, who did get second place on this leg. Now, the interesting thing about them is it did seem like coming into the episode that Emily and Molly were talking about them as these big threats, and while I felt like that would mean that Marcus and Michael would not win the battle here, they still did surprisingly well on the rest of the leg. I really felt like they were going to struggle quite a bit, only to allow Emily and Molly to pass them, but really, they weren't that far behind Emily and Molly for a lot of the leg, where even on the second detour, where it seemed like that memory task would not suit them, like they did surprisingly well on that task, getting it on only the second attempt, I believe. And for them to still come out on top, getting a second place finish, like despite other teams like really going back and forth, really speaks to how consistent they've been up to this point, and I can't really ignore that at this point. But even so, I do acknowledge the fact that, again, they haven't quite been propped up as much as Emily and Molly, and kind of similar to how I felt about Ryan and Dusty in 33, I feel like there is some potential for them to fall behind later on, where other teams start to recognize them as the big threat, and through that they could start getting dunked on more in the edit, to where maybe they don't win by the end of it. So I do acknowledge that is a slight concern, and if that's the case, then they would probably drop on this ranking. But considering how consistent they've been up to this point, I can't really ignore how strong of a team they are and how consistent they've been up to this point, which is why I do have them here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I am also covering Survivor 43 as that is coming out, so you can expect weekly power rankings for that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server. I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.